Welcome to the Determined Truth Podcast.
Want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
Where we aim to explore questions of truth, the scriptures, and what it means for the church today. Here are your hosts, Rob Dalrymple and Vinnie Angelo.
Hey everyone, welcome in. We are continuing through the book of Revelation, though we're getting near the end of Revelation, which is always the sweetest part of Revelation. Yeah. And we've done at least 50 episodes or so on this. And today we're actually going to have two really great guests, one returning and one new. And so I'm really excited to have that conversation. Rob, give us an update. The reason why we're doing this podcast now is because you've been working on and completing your commentary on Revelation. Is there an update on that?
Actually, so I should get my draft of the edits back to the editor by next week. And so I'm hoping that it'll be out in the next 4 to 5 months. Thank you. We're so excited today to have Cody Matchett and Scot McKnight joining us today. They've written a phenomenal text together. Cody is a pastor, scholar, and writer from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. He's the co-author of the book Revelation for the Rest of Us, a prophetic call to follow Jesus as a dissident disciple. He's also the co-host of the Kingdom Roots podcast with Scot McKnight and is a New Testament PhD student at Ridley College. And if you were with us on the live stream last week with Michael Bird, Michael is overseeing Cody's work. He's explored the character in the Greco-Roman world. He lives in Calgary, Alberta, Canada with his wife, Brianna, his daughter, Alethea, and his son, Atticus. Scot McKnight is the co-author. Scott is a recognized authority in the New Testament, early Christianity, and historical Jesus. He's the author or editor of some 75 books, including the award-winning The Jesus Creed, which we've talked about before. It's a phenomenal work. I love that book. Yep. The subtitle of that book is Loving God and Loving Others. It won the Christianity Today Book of the Year Award for Christian Living. He's a professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary in Lyon, Illinois. And his blog, The Jesus Creed, is recognized as one of the most important Christian blogs on the web. Scott had obtained his PhD from the University of Nottingham and has been a professor for more than 3 decades. He and his wife, Chris, live in Liberty, Illinois. They enjoy traveling, long walks, gardening, and cooking, and they have 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. Scott and Cody, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
For having us.
Good to be with you.
Yeah.
As we mentioned a little bit before.
Good to see Vinnie and good to see Cody again.
Absolutely. Very good. Scott and I, by the way, were able to hang out at a Bible conference he did. And if you ever have an opportunity, if your local area has a Bible conferences and he comes in, those are just always great to go to. But he just does a great job as a keynote speaker and in your breakout session. That was so much fun on the world, rethinking the Pharisees. That's going to be a book coming out, right? You said?
Yeah.
I cannot wait for that.
I don't know the title yet.
Okay, that was the name of the session. We'll go with that though. Yeah. But thanks for sharing that.
As we talked about a little bit before we actually started recording, I really loved your book. I read it and kept finding myself saying, yes, right on. Not only were you nailing what I think Revelation is about, but you took some very bold steps in applying it to the present day church in the United States. And there were a few times I thought, I can't believe you said that, but right on. And thanks for doing so. And we're going to get to some of those points, I hope, as we go. But perhaps let's begin by each of you giving some context maybe for how you were raised with respect to the book of Revelation and the end times, and then how you came to write this book together.
Some of the stronger statements are made by Cody because he's from Canada. He can get by with it.
There you go. Very, very true.
I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. Cody and I have told our stories one another. I'll start, and then Cody has the advantage of not having grown up the way I did.
Yeah.
I grew up in a dispensational church, though it wasn't an obsession in our church. Our pastor was not keen on dispensational speculation, but we all had the Schofield Bible.
Yep. Okay.
And our Sunday school teachers, which is the fundamental form of children's formation theologically rather than the sermons, our Sunday school teachers, to my memory, were all dispensationalists, pre-trib rapture, keen on the state of Israel, convinced that it would all happen within a generation. And I remember when I was a freshman in college coming back, maybe it was fall break or something, and maybe it was spring, we had a guest speaker who told us that it would all be wrapped up by 1978.
Wow.
And I asked my youth pastor, this was 1973, I asked my youth pastor if I should continue to go to college, and he said, yes, just in case this guy's wrong. But He thought the guy was right. So I grew up in that and I became liberal, as it were, when I became when I believed in the post-trib rapture.
That's part of our evolution, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right. It's still the same dispensational reading.
Yeah.
mostly. And then once I studied Jewish apocalyptic literature, I just, in a sense, put all that stuff behind me and reformulated it. But
Should we say you left it behind?
yes, I did.
Wah,
leave it
wah,
behind.
wah, wah.
Yes,
Dad
yes.
joke.
Never heard that one before. But the thing is, I didn't teach other than a lecture, the book of Revelation, for about 30 years of my teaching
Wow.
career.
All right. Yeah.
It was just one lecture a year in my survey of the Bible.
Yep.
But when I got to Northern Seminary, I devoted some more lectures to it. And it was at one of my students asked me to teach on it. And eventually then I taught a class. And Cody was my graduate assistant at the time.
Oh, okay.
And he's a very gifted scholar himself. So we began working together on the lectures. And then I realized this is a book and Cody needs to help me.
Yeah.
So it's both of our product.
Excellent.
Yeah, my
Excellent.
experience is quite a bit different from Scott's. One of the ways that I've described it is partially just that my mother was French, nominal Roman Catholic. My father was nothing but the son of a faithful, praying Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada woman that never went to church. And so they didn't know what to do with us. Do Roman Catholic, Pentecostal, they just did nothing, didn't grow up going to church. When I first became a follower of Jesus, I had maybe the opposite reaction to generations prior to mine. I'm a millennial. So I just didn't get it. And with that, I just didn't really want to have anything to do with it. It was scary and strange. And the things that people said about it didn't really align with much of other parts of the New Testament, like the Gospels or the letters of Paul. And so I just wanted silence. And I find in my experience, I pastor all ages, but I teach at a ministry school here in Calgary. I do professor of kind of Bible and theology there. And most of my students feel similarly, like most young people seem to want to shove it under the rug. Let's not really say too much about it. It's a little bit strange and confusing, unless they're maybe more swept up in that dispensational or speculative reading. So I have a very different experience than Scott's, and I'm assuming many people in church, where I just didn't have much experience of the book growing up at all. And so a different way to read it wasn't scandalizing or shocking to me at all. It was just a live possibility that was always on the table because I didn't know how to read it one way or another.
Excellent.
That's great. That's so helpful, because I know for me, the first time I entered seminary, and I'd grown up in a dispensational background, but when I started seminary, I had heard Rob talk enough because he was on staff at the church I was at. And so I got to neutral, or more of just like apathy with it, where I'm just like, okay,
Yes.
I'm not that, but I'm not embracing anything anymore. For me, and this ties into your guys' books, 3 of the great resources that I've used as growing in my own studies, and then what I encourage other people, your guys is on one of them now, is reading how to read Revelation. So reading Mike Gorman's book, Reading Revelation Responsibly, like I had to read that in seminary, and right off the bat, that was so helpful.
Yeah.
Rob, he released a book, Follow the Lamb, a couple years ago, which is another guide to read Revelation, but it's not doing the same thing Mike Gorman's doing.
Right.
It's very complementary. And then as I'm reading your guys' book, you're doing the same thing, but you're not repeating each other. And so I'm just so thankful for those resources, because I feel if you wanted, especially from the layperson standpoint, if you want to jump into a study of Revelation, don't start with Revelation. I would actually go through with all 3 of those books, because they're really going to help provide you a foundation from different aspects, and it will help you with the study. So I would just say, like, those are the 3 now. It used to be the 2 that I would recommend. Those are the 3 now that, I put on kind of the Mount Rushmore of prep for those. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Question though, because you guys open up in your book and you guys say dispensationalism's reading of Revelation breeds confidence in America and not dissonance about Babylon. Tell us what you mean about that, because especially the layperson is going to hear Babylon and they're like, they're gone. They don't even exist anymore. What does Babylon have to do anything with this?
Go ahead, Cody. You want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I can begin and then Scott can take over. I think the first thing that we should probably have to recognize in reading the book of Revelation, and we're borrowing on a different book that Scott wrote. We're not reading all the books of the New Testament backwards. Scott wrote a great book called Reading Romans Backwards. But part of what we argue in our book is that if you really want to make sense of the pressure that's coming on the 7 churches and the divine disciplines, or the kind of judgments that are rolling out through the book, and the kind of direction of the elimination and eradication of evil, you have to think first about Babylon. And so once we get through part 1 of our book, which is setting up the book, we jump immediately to chapter 17 and 18. And I'll answer this part and then I'll punt over to Scott. In the time period that John wrote Revelation, in that kind of Second Temple Jewish period coming into the New Testament, we see Babylon being used all over the place. as a term, a derogatory term to describe empires or cities or places that stand against God. So Asia is described as Babylon. Of course, Rome is repeatedly described as Babylon. You can see this in Ezra or Baruch. You even see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we throw some of those references in our book. But Babylon is, I think, in the biblical imagination, it becomes this word that gets thrown around to describe these tyrannical empires that stand against God. Anyone could take on the spirit of Babylon, if you will.
Right.
And I think John is doing something similar with Rome. And so Babylon is present through Rome. And as we'll chat about in our book, it plays through history. But Scott, why don't I punt to you then? So Babylon is present for John, and there's a lot of Babylon in the churches.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. And dispensationalism has taught at an incredibly effective and penetrating way the American church and all the churches in the world that have been imported from America and the Schofield Bible to read the Bible, read the book of Revelation as a prediction of some future empire that could be Rome again, which is really silly right now to think about it, but it would be. They've taught us to predict that. And at the same time, those who wrote about dispensationalism this way were almost entirely in the United States, is where it all took place, all the important parts. Now, I know Darby was from Ireland and he taught in England, but he influenced the United States through people like C.I. Schofield at Philadelphia College of the Bible, whatever it's called, PBI, I guess at the time, but Biblical Institute. And America was a country that was Christian and sending missionaries to the whole world. So it was the right country, and it aligned itself with Israel. So Israel and the United States, and any country that wants to align themselves with the United States and Israel, then is in the right. They're the team that's going to win. And as a result, the Americans, in reading the book of Revelation, failed to recognize the presence of Babylon in Washington, D.C., or in Chicago, or in L.A. It's not just one place. Babylon is everywhere and always at the same time. So that's why I really like that statement. I didn't know we made that statement. But that's a pretty good statement. Instead of being dissonance of Babylon, when we see it, we become allegiant to the United States no matter what we do.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I think to tie those two things together, then I think in John's imagination, Babylon is Rome, but Babylon is always. And then I think this particular, we call it the speculative way of reading Revelation, trains us not to see Babylon at all, but rather to have confidence in America or nation or our place. Yeah.
Okay.
And this becomes one of the dangers of dispensationalism or any literalistic reading. And this is where even in my own congregation, I have to remind them, because we are shifting out of a dispensational ethos for many years and saying, hey, it's not literal, but it's true. You have to remind folks that, because they live in that binary. If it's not literal, it's not true. No, this is a true statement. He's just not literally meaning this. And so while John is using Babylon as being indicative of Rome at this time, Babylon is the prototype for any sort of evil empire, and that transcends time and location and language and Caesars and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree.
This is excellent. Let's go a little bit further, but let's first kind of define what you mean by some of these terms. So when you say dissident disciple, what do you mean by dissident disciple? What does that mean? And then what do you mean by Babylon? Especially you say Babylon's the problem in many of our churches. When you're using Babylon here, how are you using it? What do you mean by that?
Okay, I'll do dissident disciple and Cody will do Babylon. I don't know. We can both do either one. So a dissident disciple has a double dissidence. They are resisting the reality and the pervasive presence of Babylon, which I think in the first century was Rome. And it was an ability to recognize, discern the presence of Rome in the church and in the world and its impact on everybody's life. And they are dissident then in two senses. They are dissident or resistors of Babylon, Rome, at the public level, willing to speak against what's happening and willing to speak in favor of Jesus Christ as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And they are also dissidents. They express dissidence against the presence of Babylon in the church, because the sins that we find in Revelation 2 through 3 are the sort of sins that are present in Revelation 17, 18, and a little bit of 19. So the sins of the churches are the sins of the presence of Babylon in the churches. So dissidence is a dual dissidence against Rome and against the church's complicity in Rome.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen.
Mhm.
Amen. I love boo yeah, and a song erupts. I think for us, one of the things we're trying to do, and we take the language of dissident disciple, is we're trying to take two key ideas from the book of Revelation and weld them together maybe into more current language that we understand. Revelation plays on the language of faith, but in particular witness, time and time again. And so it'll set up the book by saying that Jesus is the faithful witness par excellence. There is no other faithful witness more faithful. And so I think when it comes to dissidents in the church, we're talking about faithfulness to the way of the Lamb. And when it comes to dissidents in Rome, we're talking about public witness in the public sector, in declaring that Rome's way is not the way. Rome will not live forever, but we witness to the way of the Lamb. So these are those who overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their witness. We often translate as testimony there. So I think here we're talking along the stream of Revelation's language of faith and witness, that there's a willingness to recognize. And I think I'm a pastor, and I know you guys do pastoral ministry, and I see it, that the temptation to allow the structures and the schemas, the ideas, the ways of empire, nation, city structure, propaganda, all of these things to make their way in. And we're not embodying that alternative ethic of witness to a different kingdom, but we're in some sense parroting or mirroring aspects of the broader culture in that sense. So I think dissidence invites us to ask, where is there too much of Babylon in our churches? I think that's one of the ways that I'm always thinking about it, is how has, as Scott has put it on several occasions, how has the Babel worked its way in, and how do we need to, which is exactly what Jesus does in his speeches to the churches, is he calls out ways in which the sins of Babylon have made their way into our communities.
We hope you're enjoying the podcast, and we want to remind you that everything we do at Determined Truth, the podcast, Rob's blog, and our YouTube channel, is available on the Determined Truth app. Directions on how to download the app is available in the show notes and on the determinedtruth.com website. Just click on the app tab. Can we flesh that out a little bit more, especially in terms of the church? Because we do have, and you guys do list in your book, like characteristics of Babylon, but in maybe this is my dualism, or maybe the layperson's dualism of wanting to separate. There's church and state, and so we don't do. Well, there's some churches that do the Pledge of Allegiance in a service, but for the church that doesn't have the American flag on stage, or whatever flag, the Canadian flag, or whatever nation you're a member of, what are the ways that we would see Babylon influencing a church when it's not overt?
Or Christians within the church.
Or Christians within the church, yeah.
I think we have to recognize characteristics of Babylon. I'm a Bible guy. I let the Bible say the first word, and then I see how it manifests itself in the church. I know there are really skilled people who look at our culture and then try to find biblical texts that can support, and they do a good job at this, and I learn from them. But to me, we list out 7 marks of Babylon.
You're right.
That it's anti-God, that it is opulent, wealthy, that it persecutes the followers of Jesus, that it's full of image and branding. And I think, Rob, your emphasis on propaganda in the beast is very important. As militarism, economically exploitative and very luxurious and successful. And it's arrogant. So I'll tell you what I'm looking for. I'm looking for major characteristics of Babylon in Revelation that show up in the history of empires and that are showing up in the United States. So here's where I see it. Militarism. The United States can blow up every country in the world. Look at the bombs that Israel can use.
Right.
We're buying them for them. We're sending them to them.
And Ukraine.
And Ukraine. We're sending them there, too. I'm not a fan of Putin, by the way, but still. Probably they're using some of our stuff too. So I'm looking for militarism. I'm looking for arrogance. And I can't think of anything more prototypically arrogant than Donald Trump, who was a president who wants to make America great again. This is the slogan of Babylon. And this is not a statement about political party. It's a statement about Babylon and seeing through the Bible into our modern political world and making discernments that are consistent with the gospel itself and the gospel about Jesus. And I look at economic exploitation and
Right.
luxury.
Yep.
These are characteristic of the United States. Now, in my book, Pastor Paul, at some point, I found this book that 90% of American garages have an average of 400 boxes of junk in them and no room for cars. Okay, now, I don't think it's 400 boxes actually in the garage, although there are a lot of garages with boxes. They've turned them into, what do they call these places where people don't have enough space?
The storage places, yeah.
The storage
Yeah,
places.
they're everywhere.
But their garages are so full of junk that they don't have room for their car. But that's the United States. 90% of garages have approximately 400 boxes of extra stuff in them. I have a lawnmower and a snowblower and some garbage cans and some stuff that has to do with the yard, but nothing else. And we're pretty proud of our garage having space for our 2 small cars. But I really believe those are the things, Rob, that I'm looking for. And I'm asking myself the question, do we as Christians see this as our right?
Yep.
And are we complicit in a way of life that is Babylonian? That's what I think we're asking.
Okay. I think if we can flesh this out some more, because I think this is a key point, that the material wealth, the prosperity, the comfort, the power, the pleasure, the peace that comes with that, and that what we've done then to justify that lifestyle is we've bought the ideology of what you call wild thing number 2 or beast number 2, that is furthering the agenda of beast number 1, empire. And so putting all that together, then we have become comfortable, powerful, and wealthy, and we've justified that. And the way of maintaining that power, wealth, and comfort is by continuing the well-being of the entity, which is in this case the empire, the nation, and it can ultimately do no wrong. And therefore we justify its wars, and we don't go and say, wait a minute, and I'm not a friend of Putin either, but if we can go there for just a second and say, we're sending billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine so that the people in Ukraine can die. Let's be honest, that's what's happening. What we're doing is we're funding a military industrial complex who wants those weapons to go overseas, when the reality is the best thing for the people of Ukraine is to negotiate, as Christ would have us do, because we're supposed to be the peacemakers, a peaceful solution to this conflict that doesn't advocate for war. What do you think of that? Is that resonating?
Totally, for me.
Okay.
I totally agree. I can't convince the Ukrainian leaders or the Russian leaders to listen to me. We don't exactly text with one another. But I totally agree with that. And I think that war is the desperation of power-mongering people rather than the way of Jesus.
Exactly. Which we threw Trump under the bus, and I'm totally good with that. Let's throw Biden under the bus too, because I think he's a warmonger. He is sending billions of dollars to fight these wars when they are not in the best interest of Israel. They're not in the best interest of Ukraine. Israel is not doing well, let alone the 35,000 people in Gaza that are already dead, the 17,000 orphans that have been created in Gaza. And we can go on and on. You can see I'm a little passionate about this. And the best solution is Jesus' solution, that the way of violence is not the way of long-term peace and prosperity. The way of peace and the way of diplomacy is what's done. But I think Biden's capitulating to the military-industrial complex. But then you look at the American church, and what are we doing? Oh, we have to do this. And I've had live streams with, I won't mention Christian scholars that you know very well. Israel has to defend itself. Israel has to do this. Israel has to eliminate Hamas. Stop. I think we're giving into the beast. And all right, I'll stop there.
I think in John's imagination, then at the end of chapter 12, the dragon goes underground. I think this is part of John's point, is the dragon starts to wage war against the seed of the woman. He raises up Beastie 1 and then Beastie 2. And so in John's mind, when you worship Beastie 2 and you worship Beastie 1, you bow the knee to the dragon. That's the point. The dragon is underground. You don't see the dragon, but this is John's apocalyptic imagination, that when the church fawns in these ways, sycophantically, over whether it be leaders or military or image or status or war or opulence, all of these things are in our churches, then we inadvertently find ourselves marked not by God, but marked by the beast, because worship marks us. And so I think when it comes to church, to come back to Vinnie's sort of original question here too, I think I would want to say, as a pastor, I'm just really concerned with where people are bending the knee Monday to Saturday, if you will, and where their worship and allegiance and witness is going. And it seems to be swept into all of these other directions rather than allegiance to the Lamb in their sort of everyday life. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to expand on a couple of these categories of the 7 categories here, but wouldn't you say, before we even do that, as soon as someone starts listening to what we're saying right now, they're going to go, what do you mean? The natural response is going to be this defense mechanism, because I think there's a prophetic voice that's being ushered here. There's going to be resistance, and there's going to be this, I'm not sure that's true. What does this mean? And all the insecurities that come along with if they listen to us. Let's speak to that for just a second, if you can.
Well, the key thing is, and this is why you brought up Biden, I brought up Trump, because I think the people who are dispensational speculative people, they lean Republican.
Sure,
but when
absolutely.
I push against Trump, they think, oh, you're a Democrat.
Exactly.
That right there. And so you bring in Biden. I totally agree. That right there is an example of complicity.
Exactly.
They think either you're one or the other.
Exactly.
And if you happen to be against Trump, that means you're pro-Biden, and that means you're probably pro-abortion, and that means you may not even be a Christian.
Exactly. You're a liberal.
So they have become, the American public has been so politicized. Two things about this. One is, I like Cody's voice along with mine in this book, because as a Canadian, he doesn't care about the Republicans or the Democrats, basically. They see the whole situation differently. I've been in Denmark. I remember sitting in Denmark at breakfast with a very intelligent young Danish person. A lot of them are intelligent people. And they said something like this. They said, Obama and Trump are the same. They said, we've got the liberals. You don't have any liberals. Obama's not even close. And so they have social democrats and communists and socialists, and that's the spectrum for them. And that outside perspective on the politics of the church in the United States is prophetic for people who will listen to it, to see that we have become so politicized that we cannot even see the truth of the book of Revelation's power for what it would say to us today.
That's good.
Let's do a mic drop and stop the podcast there.
You agree?
Yeah. Cody, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I'm not much for reading reviews or criticism, but in conversation with people in particular, I think this has been one of the sort of largest criticisms leveled by the book, is that I think people think we're going after conservatives. Yeah. And we're going light on liberals, which means Scott and I are Democrats. And I'm Canadian. I'm not even. And so it's one of those funny situations where I think Scott's right. People don't have a category for it. And so the criticism they can only level is a partisan criticism. And I do think that there is a broader political spectrum. There's a broader way of thinking. And the kingdom of God, I think, would want a word with our the way we conceptualize politics in the church. I think Jesus in his kingdom would want to have the last word.
One of our editors actually wrote this to me. I'd like you to be more critical of progressive. And I said, the book of Revelation is not critical of progressives the way you want them to be. I said, these are the points in Revelation 17 through 19. We deal with those. And these are not the problems of what you want to talk about. There's a time to critique when these are the points you're making. Let it go. But I did write a long history of progressivism. And I have just a little bit of an appendix. And I do think that there's things to say there. But the book of Revelation is pointing at people who want to get close to power to use the power. And
Well, that was the point I was going to make. Is so much of that last conversation that we were having, at the heart of it involves power and authority.
Yeah.
Seeking after that.
Yep.
And we've even seen this in the American context over the last decade, especially with the MAGA movement. It's what are you willing to give up in order to retain power and authority,
Right.
which is it's anti-revelation, which is the Lamb overcome in Revelation. It's by becoming slain, right? That's the means by which the people are supposed to also overcome by being like the Lamb, this is just the biblical narrative, especially the Jesus narrative. I'm knee deep in a study on household codes right now to teach at my church. And the thing that I was struck with most, and this is me teaching in a complementarian environment. So I'm just trying to figure out, okay, where am I actually at on how to understand household codes and wanting to be sensitive to those things. But at the heart of it, even the household codes, this is a strict challenge to power and authority of men. We think that this largely has to do with what women can and cannot do, and what children can and cannot do, and slaves cannot do. I think the men are the ones walking out of that church meeting hearing these letters read, whether it's in Ephesus or Colossians, and they're the ones saying, oh man, I'm the one who has to give everything up. It's not that these people have to give stuff up. They're gaining. I have to give something up, but I'm entitled to these things by nature of being a patriarch. I don't get to have this inherent authority. I don't get to have this inherent power. I don't get to use slaves to work them to death or as a sexual object and go up and down the house. Christianity is about giving up your authority and not grasping onto it. It's Philippians 2. It's the Carmen Christi. And I don't understand why this doesn't make more of a dent. Churches, when have we ever seen a church in their mission statement on the wall is either John 13, the world will know you're my disciples by love for what you have for one another, or Philippians 2, in that be like Jesus who had all the power and gave it up to serve others. Like, how come that's just not part of the ethos of the American church? I can't speak to the global church. And I think this is what John is writing about as well in its own context.
Yeah, very good.
Hey everyone, we want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast. And we want to remind you that everything we provide at Determined Truth is free of charge. And this even includes all of the teaching that Rob does on a weekly basis to pastors in India and around the world. We don't have any supporters that get special behind the scenes access. But we can only do this with the generous support that comes from those of you who can afford to give. So if you would prayerfully consider supporting us with anything from $5 a month or more, we will continue to work hard to challenge the church to be the church. To give, go to determinedtruth.com and click on the Give tab, or follow the link in the show notes.
Yeah, I think this is the whole of the New Testament. This is the Jesus story also. So one of the points that you have of your 7 is economic disparity. And one of the things that I found interesting is that I would totally agree with Vinnie. I think it's all about power. We'll have Warren Carter come back on an episode here pretty soon as well. But I think power is driven by money and the financial things that drive the power and the money. And I think that's what's happening on the college campuses, as the blog that I wrote that came out today was the large donors that are given to the universities say, silence these people. And it's all working together. But one of the things that you make in the statement on page 212, you said, there's no reason that a nation with as many Christians as the United States has or claims to have should have such disparity in income and housing, in wages, in healthcare, and in community social capital. We may not embrace a radical solution like equal incomes. Wow. Now that sounds like a liberal to me. Okay, I had to throw that in there. Sorry.
I can begin if you want, Scott, while you look at that. I think Revelation 18, 17, and 18, we have this really long list of just incredible things that Rome trades in. And it's
28 items,
woods and
right?
Cinnamon and just all this stuff. And at the very end of it, it's like John's like delaying beneath all of these things. It's like John saying, we stack all of these things and the lowest thing on the rung, as though it's like the least important, the very bottom of these ships are the bodies of human beings, like the beings, the souls of humans, that Babylon trades on this type of economic exploitation. And there is a kind of fear, even with something like, let's say, a basic universal income. It was a study that was done actually here in Canada years ago in Dauphin, Manitoba. I've been to Dauphin. I don't know if you have any Canadian listeners. I guarantee you they've never been to Dauphin, Manitoba. I've been there. And there was a study, the Dauphin was chosen. And what they did was they gave a basic income, a basic monthly income to these citizens in Dauphin, Manitoba. And they wanted to follow a study to see what they did with that money, because there's money that can be given for these types of purposes. And everyone will say people will get lazy and they won't work and they'll just become bums and they won't do anything. They'll spend it on alcohol. And the study actually revealed the opposite. People used it to spend more time with their families and the flourishing of the communities. People used the money to go back to school or upgrade on education to better the sort of community and society. So even there, and we don't have a lot of studies like that, but that study is just a great example of a situation where something like a redistribution of funding so that people can have a basic income can actually do the opposite of maybe what in our flesh we fear it could do. So that's like one example of a situation where Babylon trades in human souls. And maybe in God's economy, we trade on the elevation of humans over goods so that humans can thrive and succeed. What do you think, Scott?
I totally agree with that. And I would like to see more studies to prove this. My experience of European Christians, Australians, New Zealanders, foreigners to the United States, so non-Americans, and by that USA, are stunned that the evangelical movement in the United States doesn't believe in universal health care. They cannot comprehend this. I cannot comprehend. I think, what's the problem here? Now, look, I do know that in Denmark, they can pay 50% in taxes. I also know that people in Denmark are not worried.
Right.
Their level of anxiety is so much different. They're also not, most of them are not as wealthy as we are. But I really believe that American evangelicals will be held accountable for their complete blindness and deadness of heart and tone deafness to economic justice and economic disparities in the United States. And the book of Revelation is, look at Rome. Rome's got everything. And they did have everything. And they exploited. They would go in and take over cities in Africa, Northern Africa, or somewhere else, and just rip them off of all their resources and take them back to Rome. They didn't care about those people. Christians should care about all people, that all people should have food, clothing, and shelter.
And this is Jesus again. Blessed are the poor. Woe to you who are well-fed. Woe to you who have all these things now. And of course, the parable in Luke 16 of the rich man and Lazarus. So the next one is militarism. You say on page 214, the dragon loves war because wars produce death. So talk about how militarism fits into the beast.
Peter is one who uses Babylon for Rome as well. And Peter is one who has taught us that the dragon, Satan, loves to lead to death. The ultimate goal of Satan is destruction and death in order to prevent life, the life of God, from flourishing in the world.
That's a good point. That's a good way of saying it.
So here we are with militarism. Militarism in the Roman Empire was as brutal as anything. I know the Assyrians have a really bad reputation in the ancient world, but Rome was brutal, and they would just rip off places and kill people and slaughter people and rape women and just make exhibitions of gore and brutality. And they called it Pax Romana. It was nothing other than conquering. Militarism is the power to threaten another person's life and livelihood in order to gain domination over that person. And we, as believers, are supposed to believe that power is exhibited in serving rather than in dominating. Jesus teaches this with utter clarity in Mark 10, 35 to 45. This is not the way it will be among us, he says to James and John. We will not be like the lording over of others that we find in the Roman Empire. And of course, in Antipas, in Tiberias, and Pontius Pilate in Caesarea Maritima that shows up in Jerusalem. Militarism is a sickness, and it's a display of Babylonian way of life rather than the way of the Lamb.
Let's maybe get into some significant application points real quick, just so the layperson can have a chance to stop and pause and say, okay, what does this mean for me so far? Because we've talked a lot of big picture, talked theory, and in a sense, just minor critiques of those and whatnot. But you guys wrote on page 220 and 221, we believe evangelicals in the USA have been seduced into partisan politics in such a way that they have effectively abandoned the way of the Lamb. I think it's good and noble to put out the warnings, like the negative, like this is what we're not doing right now, guys. What is the positive though? Like, what is a way to correct this? And with that, okay, what are some things? Is there a rubric or something that we could use to self-diagnose, or just questions that the listener can ask themselves to say, okay, have I been seduced by these sorts of things? And what are some first steps I can take just to correct the trajectory of where I'm at?
Yeah, I can think of a few things in particular. One of the things that I found fascinating about Jesus's speeches to the churches is that you get very little in the New Testament of Jesus talking about the church. I find lay people are usually surprised by that. Jesus, we get no church according to Jesus, if you will. But in Revelation 2 and 3, we get the church according to Jesus. And he is a little bit frustrated about some things. With Ephesus, it seems to be that they're not holding fast to love. They only want hard lines of orthodoxy. So they want to love God, but they don't want to love neighbor. So they want to have their piety, but they don't want to extend it outward. When he comes to other churches, he wants to highlight things like, I praise you because you're willing to suffer and to have witness for the sake of the gospel. Am I willing to suffer and have witness? I had a student a couple of years ago when I was teaching through Revelation. She's a brand new Christian, the best kind of person to read Revelation, in my opinion. And at one point she raised her hand and she said, so let me get this straight, because I find this a little uncomfortable. It sounds like what Revelation is saying is that the way we win is by dying.
Yeah.
And I said, yep.
Bingo.
Yep. You got it. She said, I'm a little uncomfortable with the martyrdom. I was like, as we all should be. I think that kind of suffering witness, I think what defines truth, because the dragon deals in propaganda and lies. What Sigrid Tonstad in his commentary wants to keep saying, he mudslinging. The dragon just slings mud. And so we need the one with the sword that proceeds from his mouth to speak truth in a world of lies. We need discernment in a kind of moment of cultural accommodation, committed to one another, perhaps in a moment that's lukewarm. So I think some of these things, I think Jesus's speeches to the churches invite us to have that kind of imagination of boots on the ground. What does Jesus critique these communities for in the ways that Babylon has creeped in? And some of them would be surprising. Like I find, you've held the orthodoxy, but you don't love your neighbor. Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay.
Powerful.
You're comfortable and you don't want to suffer. Ooh. Okay. Yeah. You're lukewarm and you're accommodating culturally. Oof. Okay. I feel that in my bones.
You say you are rich, but you don't realize that you're naked, poor, blind, miserable.
Poor.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to clean your eyes out. Like I stand at the door and knock. And I think there, and I don't know about you, Rob, but this bookend of he's knocking, he'll come in and dine with you.
Yeah.
And the dining really comes at the great marriage supper of the Lamb, the great banquet that comes a lot later. And dining is a big deal with the pagan feasts and festivals in that time and context. And so I think of some of these things. I don't mean to hijack on either, Scott, but
no, you're good.
I think when it comes to the practicalities of those churches, I think that's one of the ways, Vinnie, that we can get our boots on the ground is coming back to where is opulence here? Where is image management here? Where are these kinds of things manifest?
Let me even throw another caveat in there. I'm thinking of context that I would be in, and I'm in the Reformed tradition we're high on doctrine. We're also, I think we've benefited from the critique over the last 5 or so years of prosperity gospel and that sort of culture within the church. And so we could rightly look at those sorts of things and say, but we're not that. And that's obviously what Cody and Scott are talking about, is that prosperity living and the extravagance to have there. My folks wouldn't, they would deny that. They would say it's theologically wrong and it's wrong to go after these riches. Yet many of them still live with this and they don't even see it. And let me use I statements. That's my therapist always say. I live in this and I don't always see it. Right. So how could we even challenge the person who might reject the lavish living and that sort of thing? But no, you still have these issues. You've been conditioned to excuse it culturally.
This is a theme that is coming up in our discussion today. And I totally agree with you. I can come at this in a slightly different angle. And I think it actually exposes it. And that is, Cody has hit, I talk about the 3 W's of the book of Revelation for the Christian life, is we have to have the wisdom to recognize and discern Babylon.
Okay.
We have to be people of witness, which means we have to be willing to speak up and speak against and willing to take the heat if we do. But one of the most important themes in the book of Revelation is worship. Wisdom, witness, and worship are the three themes of the Christian life in the book of Revelation. I believe this, that the more we worship God well, the more we recognize the presence of Babylon. The more we worship God, the more we recognize the infiltrating presence of the beasts, the wild things of Revelation 13.
Yeah.
So the problem with wealth, the problem with the invisibility and our complicity in the ways of Babylon is that we are not worshiping God well. And there is so much about worship in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
It's the stunning interruptions in those central chapters, chapters 6 through 16, 4 through 16, really.
Yeah.
But 6 through 16, that just interrupt. And all of a sudden, we've got these little songs. And this is the only way you can cope with what's happening. It's the only way that it will be sustainable. It's the only way that you're going to discern with wisdom the presence of what's going on in the world. And so I do think that worship, and worship is a big word, of course, worship is central to our capacity and ability to recognize the pervasive presence of Babylon creep in the churches today.
Yeah, that's good. If I could just add, just very briefly, this puts us no more further on the ground, Vinny. So you can criticize me for this, but I think that John would want to say, "Oh, you just need an apocalypse. We need greater degrees of the curtain being pulled back." I think Scott
exactly
through worship, but Paul even uses this language himself, right? Galatians 1:15, 16, Ephesians 3. He's going to use apocalypsis to describe the curtain being pulled back and seeing clearly. So to whatever measure or degree, I think people in my church, I think I'll use an I statement too. I think what I need is an apocalypse.
Yeah. And what that apocalypse is in Revelation, of course, is that it's the way of the Lamb versus the way of the beast. Right? And both of them use the cross. The way of the beast uses the cross to put people on to demonstrate its power and to maintain obedience. And Christ says, and this is the way we do it. So the title of my commentary is Revelation, a Love Story. It's about the sacrificial, loving, faithful witness of God's people that follow the Lamb by laying down their lives for the nations. But let's be honest, that's hard. And as soon as you start doing it, you realize, oh, so Jesus really meant take up your cross and follow me. And all of a sudden, I don't know about you guys, but I've always realized for years that Matthew 6 is really like this really cool statement, but doesn't really have any significance of why do you worry about food? Why do you worry about clothing? Because I don't worry about food and I don't really worry about clothing. But as soon as you start speaking up on these issues, then the reality becomes you might lose your job. You might lose your status in society. You might lose. And I think that's what we're talking about. Is that what you think a dissident disciple means and some of its implications?
Oh, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I totally agree.
I think Revelation 14:4, right? These are those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. That's it. That's the one. Followers of Jesus follow Jesus. I've heard that somewhere before, Scott.
I like that statement.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Because it's not so obvious. People like to say I'm a Christ follower until I have to follow the Jesus that actually exists.
Yeah. Let's take this home a little bit now. It's not all bad news, right? You say at the end that churches and pastors, professors and authors, citizens and children are looking for a leader who will demonstrate a different Christian posture towards politics, asking for discipleship that challenges politicization in all its forms. They want pastors to preach a gospel that subverts Babylon. They ache for a clear, courageous voice of conviction. They believe in a gospel that forms dissidents who follow the Lamb and who have the courage to speak up and out about partisan as capitulation to Babylon. That's really true, isn't it? There's so many Christians that are aching for that. And yet we continue to propose another Jesus almost. What are your thoughts on that?
My first thought is I know a lot of Christians who are like that, who are living that way.
Yeah,
I really do. I think the system of American Christianity, the system of American evangelicalism, as it is portrayed, particularly in the media, is a very thin disguise of what Christianity is supposed to be. But I know lots of believers who are very serious followers of Jesus, who do the right thing at the right time. I think that's exactly what we believe right there. That statement. I believe people are looking for that.
Thank you so much for this. I
Yeah.
think these are the hard conversations. I can tell you right now, what I do at Determined Truth is trying to be this prophetic voice, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Well, don't read the press releases. Don't worry about what people are saying. I guess I have an advantage because I'm a professor. And
Right.
I don't need the money from an income like that. But you just have to tell the truth. And people are going to criticize. I learned a long time ago. I've been blogging for 20 years. I learned a long time ago, if I'm going to say something significant with a leading voice, there's going to be opposition.
Mhm.
If I don't want opposition, I need to just toe the party line. And I only write when I think I'm not toeing the party line. I think
Right.
I only want to write about stuff that I have something
Right.
to say that's not being said.
Yeah, I agree.
And stuff
Same
that
thing.
needs to be said. So I say, keep up the prophetic voice. I feel some days we're making great progress. I think the younger generation is going to have completely different politics
Mhm, mhm.
in
No doubt.
15 to 20 years
No doubt.
than my generation's having.
I fear, however, that they're going to swing to the other extreme of the
Exactly.
pendulum a little bit. And what I'm hoping that there's this Jesus that they grasp onto. That's one of the concerns that I've always had for 15 years now. When I saw the younger generation going their way and losing the advice of the older generation, it's take Jesus with you and good to go. But I
Yeah.
fear it so much that they're almost walking away from the Jesus part of it as well.
Oh, I think that's a big issue. But I'm
Yeah.
also, we have a book with Zondervan with a pastor I do it's called Invisible Jesus. And an increasing number of the younger generation are fed up with church because they go to church and they don't hear about Jesus.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They're not getting Jesus enough. So I think that this is a big country, 300 million people. We're going to have a lot of people who are distorting it in both ends. But I see an instinct for economic justice and for a lack of violence
Mm.
in ways that I've never seen in my lifetime before, except among the hippies in the 60s and 70s, who did very little other than to become Reagan people.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
All right.
Hey, this was such a great conversation. We want to encourage everyone, and we'll link to it in the show notes. But Revelation for the Rest of Us, a prophetic call to follow Jesus as a dissident disciple by Scot McKnight with Cody Matchett. And Scott, you've had prolific works that have helped shape the last generation of the church. I'm so excited to talk with Cody and read him, because I think he's going to be that guy who's going to help that next generation. And what a
I
great
agree.
bridge that we have there.
Yeah, yeah.
So excited to hear his voice and just look for what he's going to be contributing to the popular and scholarly world, as well as pastoring his own folks. So we just appreciate you guys so much spending time with us.
Thank you very much, Vinnie. Good to see you.
Yeah, but
And Rob, and our prayers for both of you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We definitely need it. So appreciate it.